So, everybody listening, if you're a first timer, whether it's on the radio or the podcast, we firstly thank you for listening. If you're listening to us on the podcasting platforms, please like, subscribe, share. If you're listening to us on the radio, we also, again, thank you for listening. We have a returning guest, again, Steve Gorham. He's a speaker and author, does have a new book out. It's The Green Breakdown, The Coming Renewable Energy Failure. Steve, first of all, thanks for coming on. You really are great to bring a lot of knowledge to a lot of our listeners. We do have a lot of liberal listeners, and they do need some educating. So I appreciate you coming on again.
Thanks, Rob. Great to join you again.
So, Steve, let's talk about this. And again, if people want to learn more about Steve, it's stevegorham.com. It's GOREHAM.com. Definitely check out Steve at his website and definitely get the book. And we'll talk about that in just a second. Steve, I used to be, and I want you to talk to the liberal viewers here, because I used to be very far to the left. I was brainwashed in college. Then, obviously, getting out of school into graduate school, the same thing happened. And I voted for all these people that preached the Green New Deal: Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, AOC. The list goes on and on. Through COVID, I really woke up and saw how the government was acting towards that. I know that has nothing to do with energy, but it does have to do with the lying and the corruption. And a lot of, I feel like former liberals are opening up their eyes now to see what the Democratic Party is doing and keeps on doing. Let's start off with that before we get into the book and energy in general. I'm sure, you're in Illinois, you're surrounded by tons and tons of liberals galore. Are you talking to any people that you are friends with or people you meet on the street that used to be former liberals that are kind of waking up right now due to what happened during COVID-19?
Well, that's kind of a tough question. I try and stay out of politics a little bit. I try and just stick with economics and science.
Okay.
The world has been captured by the ideology of climatism, if you will, the fear that humans are causing dangerous global warming. Many folks in the Democratic Party, the current administration, say we must stop greenhouse gas emissions. The United Nations has been preaching this for 3 or 4 decades now. But I've written two books on climate, one on sustainable development, and then the latest here, Green Breakdown, on the drive to get to net zero. And I've been doing this for about 13, 14 years, and really there's been no evidence that tells me that humans are driving worldwide climate change that's dominated by nature, that the storms are getting stronger despite every article in the media that you see. They're always talking about how all the storms are stronger, but they're really not. And we could go into a lot of that information if you want.
Yeah.
And then we have this tremendous drive to have everybody get electric cars, get electric appliances at home, get rid of our coal and natural gas power plants, build a green hydrogen industry from fuel industry from nothing, very, very challenging. And literally, the world is spending more than $1 trillion a year on renewables now, trying to stop the planet from warming. But there's really not any evidence that is going to have any effect, that it's going to stop the oceans from rising, that it's going to affect hurricanes or anything else. Nevertheless, that is what many, many people believe.
Well, Steve, isn't it foolish anyway? Because, we'll put this aside and say, okay, the liberals are right. I know we're not trying to get into politics, but what's true is true as far as climate change goes. We can't even get that under control, even if we do, continue on with the Paris Climate Accords and also, go fully green in general with solar, wind, electric in general, because China, India, and all these other countries are not switching over to green energy. They're just doing the same. So we're the ones that are getting screwed with high prices, and the Chinese and the Indians don't really give a damn. So it's kind of a joke, isn't it? Looking at it by that.
Yeah, it seems that way. China and India are both using more and more coal. Matter of fact, 55% of the world's electricity now comes from coal. People don't realize that. They say, well, it's former climate envoy John Kerry said we ought to ban all coal-fired power plants across the world. but we have 6,500 of those right now. We're building 1,000 or planning 1,000 new ones right now. And yet we have about 700 million people that don't even have electricity across the world. We have another 2 billion people that have blackouts or brownouts every day or every other day. So like when I present to audiences, I say, do you have an air conditioner? If you do, that one appliance uses more electricity than a third of the people get to use on any given day. So we really do need hydrocarbon fuels to continue to grow societies, to help developing nations improve their economies. Nevertheless, the US and Europe and Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and other wealthy nations are trying to force the world to net zero.
Yeah.
And that's what green breakdown is about. That's an impossible goal. It's not going to happen, and it is going to break down, and there's a lot of reasons for that.
Let's talk about green breakdown because you kind of talked about John Kerry, who is among many celebrities and politicians that is flying around the country and the world on their private jets. It's almost like do as I say, not as I do for these politicians, these celebrities, musicians, that they can go on all their private jets and own these big yachts, but you can't because you're going to be committing treason or crimes or whatever the heck we want to say, because you'll be putting on a lot of global warming and pushing that narrative as far as that goes if you keep doing this. Is that what you're seeing with these people?
There is a lot of that. Mr. Kerry has said his work is too important for him to fly public transportation. So, I mean, he just thinks that's the way it is.
Yeah.
You know, we have many other. Bill Gates has huge homes that use 20 or 30 times the electricity of the average citizen. Al Gore the same way.
Right.
Nevertheless, I think these folks are sincere. I think that they think the world is in crisis. They have to force us to do all these things to change it. But I think it's interesting right now. I wrote an article recently talking about the coming. We're into the age of underpopulation now, of population decline, and the elites, the United Nations, all the wealthy people told us for 44 decades or so that we had this disaster with overpopulation. We all had to cut back our family sizes and do everything else. And the author of The Population Bomb, oh, help me out here. Why can't I remember? Paul Ehrlich.
Right.
I mean, he said we were going to have hundreds of millions of people die in the 1980s from starvation. Didn't happen. He also said if he was a gambling man, he'd give 50-50 that England wouldn't be around in the year 2000. I mean, there were all these gloomy predictions made. But as I point out in my article, all the elites were wrong. They were all wrong about overpopulation. Now we have population declining on every continent in the world except Africa. And I think the climate is the same way. A lot of these wealthy folks say we've got to do all these things to save the climate, but the evidence shows that they're not correct on that as well.
We saw that with The Inconvenient Truth, the movies that came out with Al Gore, that he was predicting all these things to happen, and obviously they did not happen. I want to talk about the book in general. So, just talk about that, Steve. What made you want to write the book in general as far as Green Breakdown?
And I think it was, as I say, the drive for net zero across the world. So Green Breakdown is a color paperback. It's a complete story of a little bit of energy history first, but then it talks about power plants, home appliances, electric vehicles, heavy industry, heavy transportation, and the recent energy crisis we just went through in Europe for a couple of years, where natural gas and electricity prices skyrocketed, and points out that this is going to fail. There are so many problems. I should point out to your viewers that we're not going to have net zero. Net zero is an impossibility. If you build anything, if you build any building and you put glass into it and you put copper into it for piping, you put ceramic into it, you put steel into it, you put wood into it, you put concrete into it, all of those things emit carbon dioxide when they're produced and when they're transported. You literally cannot even build a grass hut that is net zero. If you cut down trees and grass and make a hut, you emit carbon dioxide. That's the way the world is. Now, the real good news is that nature, what happens with the oceans and the biosphere and the volcanoes dominates what happens with the greenhouse effect and with climate. And humans are a very, very small part. And the world is going to find that out over the next 2 or 3 decades. People are going to look back on this and say this is the biggest superstition in modern history.
No, I agree with you now. I didn't before, but I definitely do now because I've woken up obviously through COVID-19 and what the government did as far as lying. And I don't want to, get into that now. But regardless of that, I want to talk about this electric car issue. I mean, we've seen gas prices go sky high and everybody says, oh, buy an electric car. First of all, half of the electric cars are 40, 50, 60, $70, $70,000, excuse me, and up. So I don't know what kind of middle class, working class family can just afford to buy an electric car. And even the subsidies that they're giving are a kind of a joke for that. Regardless of that, even if they were to get everybody, Steve, to buy an electric car, the electric prices are going to go sky high. So they can just play both games at once, correct?
Well, they are, and we should talk about that a little bit too. But
Sure.
so EVs are penetrating world markets. Last year, they were about 16% of light vehicles sold across the world, only about 9% in the United States, but 20 to 30% in Europe and China, a bigger uptake. But these things just hit a speed bump in the year 2023. We had a lot of issues. In the fourth quarter, electric vehicle sales declined in California and in Germany for the first time in years. Ford Motor lost $4.7 billion on its electric vehicle business, about $65,000 per EV sold. So Ford and GM are delaying the new product plans. And then in the first quarter, it's continued. EVs in the United States actually lost share. They're only about 7% of the vehicles sold. So they went down despite all the government incentives and everything else.
Yeah.
And
Look at
it's sort of like I think it's a little bit the quote, the early adopter phase is over. The people that wanted a cool Tesla for their second vehicle, they've probably purchased them.
yeah.
But now if you're in an apartment building and you want to have to drag a charging cord over a public walkway, that doesn't work real well. And as you say, you talk about the cost, but all of these things are factors that are kind of constraining the growth.
SteveGorham.com. Again, SteveGorham.com. Definitely check out the book Green Breakdown. Steve, I want to talk about this because I'm okay with EVs. The problem with me and the EV issue is, Steve, that you can't go on a trip, drive, like say, if I'm originally from Rhode Island, now I'm in Florida, I can't go back and forth with an EV. I'd never
No.
make it. So what is the point of buying an EV unless you're living maybe in New York City, but you would still probably be walking everywhere anyway. Same thing with Chicago, same thing with Illinois. But regardless, if you're living in a place that's out in the boonies and you have to drive everywhere, it's not going to work for you. So EVs need to even go farther than they've come to even
Yeah.
become more accessible. So it's just
Well,
not a good car.
the big advantage is charge at home. That's obviously the biggest thing. If you can do that, it can be very low cost. And if you're driving a short distance to work,
Right.
then it can be great. But
Most
there's some big
people aren't.
disadvantages. The CEO of Hertz
Right.
resigned earlier this year, a guy by the name of Stephen Scher. And what he committed to in the last year was to buy 100,000 Teslas and more than 100,000 GM EVs. And then they started to have problems. Even people that owned electric vehicles didn't want to rent them when they went to a rental store because they couldn't charge at home. They had to charge them on the road. And then what happened was that they found that they cost about twice as much to repair. The reason is if you had a collision that was a little bit more than a fender bender and you damaged the battery in any way, there's no way to repair a battery. You had to replace the whole thing, somewhere between $5,000 and $20,000. So the cost of repairs were much higher. The insurance in the United States for an EV also is higher. It's 72% higher than a gasoline vehicle. And then on the thing that really forced the problem with Hertz was last year the market price for used EVs dropped 30% in a single year in the United States. And Hertz Rental is in the car sale business. They buy new cars, they run them for a couple of years, and they sell them on the used market. And so the price of their EVs just dropped way down. They took a loss of 245 million just from the value change last quarter of last year, and then another 150 million, I think it was, first quarter this year. So it's really a black eye for electric vehicles. Uh, and they're going to improve over time, and I'm not against EVs either. The problem is that we now have 22 states that have mandates that say by 2035 or a later date, all cars sold have to be electric vehicles.
Yeah.
They got to try and force everybody because they're afraid of man-made warming. And that's the problem. Let's let the market, if you want to buy an EV, that's great. If you want to buy a gasoline car, that's great. But unfortunately, we have a lot of folks in the current administration and others trying to force everybody and tell them what to do on the cars they purchase.
I want to talk about nuclear. I've been hearing some really good things about nuclear, and it seems like the Congress is not pushing forward with a lot of new nuclear projects. I've been told that that's the case because they're worried about China, India, Pakistan pushing forward with more nuclear projects if we do it here. And then they're worried about nuclear war. Is that just a lot of fooey, or is that correct? What's your take on that?
Well, the problem with nuclear has been the history. We
Okay.
had the problems with Three Mile Island, the problems with Fukushima in Japan, the problems with Chernobyl in Russia.
But isn't the
Uh,
technology better now, Steve, though? That was a long time ago.
it's somewhat better, but the problem is that it costs a fortune to build a nuclear plant right now.
Hmm.
I spoke at the Plastic Pipe Institute. I was talking to some guys about pipes, and they said, if I sell this pipe to regular industry, the paperwork's about this much. If I sell it to a nuclear plant, the paperwork is huge. I mean,
Wow.
so it costs 10 times as much just to have in the regulations for a single piece of plastic pipe. So we have a tremendous amount of regulations, and nuclear is very, very expensive right now. They just turned on two nuclear cores in Georgia, and it costs over $40 billion for the two of them.
Wow.
So we really need cost breakdowns in nuclear. We need the regulation to come down, and we need some breakdowns. And I think maybe we can do that. There's about 50 companies working on small modular nuclear plants and molten salt nuclear plants, but we really need to see some cost breakouts so they can get back to being cost effective again. The other issue, though, about nuclear is we have 94 operating plants in the United States right now, but only 4 of them are less than 30 years old. We've only built
Wow.
4 of them in the last 30 years. They were all built from 1970 to 1990, and they're starting to get old. We have 16 plants that are older than 50 years. We have 37 plants that are older than 40 years, nuclear plants, and another 36 that are over 30 years. Now, the good news is these can last 60 years. They can be extended. But, within about a decade, we're going to have to replace a lot of these things or do an awful lot of upgrades. And this is at the same time when we're going to have a massive demand for electricity, and we're going to be kind of electricity short.
But is this a lot to do? And it seems like you're saying this, but I may be misconstruing what you're saying. Is this to do with the government bureaucracy that they're making it so expensive then? Is that what?
Yeah,
Yeah.
much. A lot of
Okay.
regulations, takes a long time, a lot of paperwork, just oceans of paperwork. And it is a very safe industry, but the new plants as well are going to be safer. They're going to automatically shut down when there's a problem with the cooling system, and they're putting some other things in too. So people shouldn't, and also the nuclear waste is going to be much lower. People shouldn't have to worry about that as much. So I think there's potential for nuclear to take over. The problem is, again, though, as we haven't really gotten to, but we're about to have a tremendous imbalance in electricity demand in this country. The amount of electricity that is going to be demanded is going to far outstrip what we can actually supply. And a big factor of that is going to be artificial intelligence, and that is going to really put a halt to a lot of the green energy movement. That is the big new thing on the horizon, and a lot of people don't know about that yet.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about that with the AI revolution and how that would affect all this.
Yeah, so let me give a little bit of background. Last year, 59% of the electricity in the United States was generated by natural gas and coal. It was 43% gas, 16% coal. But the green energy plan is to shut down that 59%. and try and replace it with wind and solar. Now, for the last 2 decades, US power demand has been flat, almost identically about 4.1 million gigawatt hours, hasn't been changing. And during that time, we've shut down 2/3 of our coal plants, and we've added our wind and solars up to about 14% now. And then the other thing is we built a lot more natural gas. But now we have a bunch of big demand drivers. The first, of course, is the electric vehicle transition. That's going to require a lot of new electricity. The second is a push for electric appliances. Now we have 7 states now that want everybody to switch to heat pumps and want to ban electric or gas furnaces in new construction, gas stoves, gas water heaters. And the third big one is a green hydrogen fuel industry that the government wants to create. I don't think that's going to happen, but so those are the 3 green drivers. But the biggest one is artificial intelligence. And this has just happened in the last year. We've had ChatGPT break onto the scene with these AI programs. We have NVIDIA now, the hottest stock in the world, selling all these AI processing cards. And so what the big guys are doing right now, and I mean Microsoft and Amazon, Google Alphabet, they are, and Oracle and some others, they are upgrading their data centers to run artificial intelligence. Now we have 2,500 data centers in the United States today, and they handle stuff like cloud storage and the internet and all that. But now they want to upgrade these to do artificial intelligence. And what they want to do with these data centers is they try and solve a problem to make the computers think like people. And so they put 10,000 processors and servers, just huge amount of servers. They run them 24 hours a day for weeks or months on end to solve these problems. And so they're in the process of upgrading all these data centers. Today, those 2,500 data centers use 4% of US electricity. But when you replace them with AI cards, they use 6 to 10 times more power. And so it's now being projected that data centers are going to use 20% of US electricity within the next decade. I mean, just a vast amount, and nobody saw this coming. Let me give you a quote from a guy in Georgia here. Jason Shaw, chairman of the Georgia Public Service Commission, he said, quote, "When you look at the numbers, it is staggering. It makes you scratch your head and wonder how we ended up in this situation. How were the projections that far off?" He means the projections for electricity demand. "This has created a challenge like we've never seen before." These big firms, Meta and Amazon and Microsoft, have gone to the power company in Virginia, and Virginia is the biggest location for data centers in the U.S. And they said, we need 2 gigawatts for our data centers, incremental. It's like 2 new nuclear plants. And so where are they going to get that? Yeah. Amazon just bought a data center that was co-located with a nuclear plant in Pennsylvania, so they could get enough electricity for their artificial intelligence. It is really amazing. And maybe I should let you get a word in edgewise here, but this is going to have some big effects.
No, it's really crazy because, again, it is do as I say, not as I do. For what?
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
Microsoft said they're all going to be green, and then they just realized, hey, we're going to need 30 or 40% more electricity.
Yeah, it's a joke, and it's very much hypocrisy. And again, just reiterating the obvious, this is what happened to me throughout COVID, is that I kind of woke up and saw not only what was going on with COVID was kind of a farce, but also what was going on with this green energy stuff, immigration. The list goes on and on of how deep our government is in the crapple, we'll just say, is a nice word. I want to go into the last 2 topics we have here. Sure. And talk about this, because I've been hearing a lot about this lately with the cloud seeding and the weather manipulation. Yeah. And, I don't want to go down the hole here. And if I'm going too far down the hole, Steve, I want you to pull me back up. But okay. It seems like these things, as far as weather manipulation and cloud seeding, can be used to obviously manipulate the weather, and it can be pushing this green energy agenda. So if they want, more rain, they're going to push for this. They're going to create flooding. They're going to create stronger hurricanes. Again, I don't want it to go too deep down the hole here, Steve. But, you don't trust the government. That's what I've been thinking about for the past 3 or 4 years now. And it seems like now I'm hearing this more and more. And obviously, you're in this field, so you would know more about this and how it works.
Yeah, I'm a little bit skeptical on this. I do think
Okay.
people have been employing cloud seeding for a while, trying to get rain in a drought situation. But the first thing you need for cloud seeding is you need clouds. If you don't have clouds, if you're in a place that's having a drought and there's no clouds around, there's really not much you can do.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of folks that are talking about geoengineering to try and engineer Earth's climates, doing things like spreading iron filings in the ocean to affect carbon dioxide emissions, those sorts of things. So far, the governments, I don't think, are doing that on any kind of a large scale. So I'm a little bit skeptical on that. But now it is true that people can affect the climate in a local area. An example is the Aral Sea in Russia. The Aral Sea pretty much has dried up. It used to be a big sea, a couple hundred miles across, but they've taken so much water out of the rivers for irrigation that the sea is kind of dried up out there. So humans can affect things on a local scale, but when you talk about on a larger scale, I think it's much more difficult. Hopefully, we won't get into that. There is possibility, Rob, we could have cooling over the next 2 decades. It's very difficult to predict what the future is likely to be. There's a lot of scientists that talk about what's going on the surface of the sun. And boy, if we get into a couple decades of cooling, it's going to be very, very difficult to explain all this mania about man-made warming.
Because I'm just reading an article right here from Time Magazine. It says why billionaires are obsessed with blocking out the sun. And then you
Yeah.
just spoke about the geoengineering. So I was just getting into that. So it just, and I don't know if you want to extend on this, but I'll just have the last word. And like I said, if you want to extend, you can. It just seeing these articles and hearing these podcasts from different people and also reading other news articles on this makes me feel very skeptical when we have a lot of these billionaires that have obviously the money to push this agenda forward that want to block out the sun. Why would we want to block out the sun when we need vitamin D to survive, when crops, trees, plants, and animals need this to survive in general?
Yep.
It's very strange. And obviously, it even goes to cutting down trees with all these big companies that are doing deforestation. And then they're all pushing this climate agenda, but the trees push out in, I mean, they receive the carbon dioxide and they, push out the oxygen. We
Yep.
need these things to survive. And there are a lot of people that have a lot of money that are pushing these scary agendas in our country and around the world. Again, I don't know if you want to extend on that, but I'll give you the last word, Steve.
Yeah, well, Will Happer of Princeton, who's an advisor of mine, has pointed out that we're at kind of a low level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere historically, and we really need more for the plants. So CO2 in the atmosphere is good. The other thing about this warming is if you look at what's happening, there's very little warming near the equator. There's about a degree of warming, degree Celsius in 140 years in the United States and the temperate latitudes. And then there's more warming up in Siberia and northern Canada. There's about 2 degrees. And so you got to kind of say, well, wait a minute. In the hot areas, it's not warming so much. In the US, we're getting a mild warming. And in Canada and Russia, where it's always cold, they're getting more warming. Is that a bad thing? And it turns
Right.
out it really isn't. Warming has been generally good for people, and they do better in warm climates.
I
So
agree
anyway, I
100%.
would like people to pick up my book, Green Breakdown. It's got a lot of fun in it. In addition to the science and the economics, it's got all kinds of things like it's got about 150 color sidebars. The one headline from the New York Times that said we should all mate with short people to stop global warming, or the guy in Sweden who is advocating eating human flesh when he speaks to audiences, a professor over there, to stop global warming. There's just all kinds of craziness going on. But eventually people are going to find out this doesn't make sense, and we're going to get away from net zero. It's going to become a hated word. It already is in the United Kingdom. They're trying to rephrase it.
Well, we're very thankful you're in the fight and trying to bring out this information to people that really need to hear it. Again, Steve Gorman, it is stevegorham.com. Definitely check out Steve at that website, and then definitely get that book, Green Breakdown. Again, stevegorham.com. Steve, thanks so much for always coming on, and look forward to having you on again sometime soon.
Okay, thanks, Rob. Best.